I will be presenting work about speaker listening interactions, and this is joint work with my colleagues Dirk Kietroen, Iwan de Kok, which is there, which you probably also met, Dennis Reitsma, and Mark de Maat. So let's first look at conversations. And conversations can be interesting. As these, I hope I have sound, by the way. Is there a way to put the sound on the speakers? Yeah? Where's the speaker? Okay.
Hi guys, are you best friends? What's your name?
Anna-Marie.
What's your name?
Nicolas.
How old are you?
2.
How old
I'm
are you?
2. No, I'm 2. Oh, you're blind. No, I'm 2. No, I'm 2. No, I'm 2. No. No, I'm 2. I'm 2. No, I'm 2.
Hi guys, are you...
Okay, so this might be, or might not be, a typical example of conversation. So you see they're interesting and also quite complex. So what we try to do here is actually twofold. So first we analyze what we see here. So we try to understand what's going on in these videos, what happens to the kids, how are they talking, how are they listening, all these kind of things. So we look at human-human interactions. Second goal is to go with this knowledge to human-computer interaction. So we try to use our knowledge and develop computer characters or robots that can display the same kind of behavior. So first we start with analyzing human-human, and we look at human-computer, and this is an arrow. So why would we do this? So talking to computers seems to have quite a long history. You see here German favorite David Hasselhoff. You see he's talking in his watch with a computer. He's using natural speech, all these kind of things. And we can go one step further. Does anyone know this clip from Milo? Okay, this was one of the first promotions for Microsoft Kinect. And they were just showcasing all the abilities of the Kinect. So the boy could have facial expressions. He would also recognize your facial expressions. He would recognize where you were and would constantly gaze at you, all these kind of things. So the boy actually had a character, and he would actually be talking to you and reacting on what you would do and what you would say. And the third example is humanoid robotics. So this guy probably made himself for some reason. And the robot head, so one of the two is the robot and the other is the actual person. The head is completely actuated, so the mouth can move, the eyes can move, and with a lot of zzz, zzz. But still that works. So this might be another future venue of work. So briefly, these topics are, we analyze human-human interactions, so we do corpus analysis, then we develop generative algorithms to display this behavior, and thirdly, we're going to evaluate how well that works. So we will have some corpus evaluations here. We will have user studies, and I think this is the first talk where we actually have that, so I'll try to put slightly more emphasis on that. A little bit of machine learning. As Fernando told you everything about it, I can keep that part really briefly. We'll do evaluation, and eventually we introduce a method to combine all of these into one framework. So there are actually 6 parts, so I think we will have a break after part 3, and I hope you're still there. So first we will start with speaker-listen interactions. What are these? How are they different from actual conversations? So if you look at normal conversations, we have some very clear structure there. So a lot of the stuff that's going on is verbal. So people are speaking to each other. Sometimes they're talking, yelling, whispering. You saw a little girl screaming. But there are also interruptions. So one person will be speaking, the next one is just interrupting him. Would also be simultaneous speech, as people at the same time try to speak. Apart from that, we also have listening. So one person is speaking, the other is listening, and there might be moments of silence. So this is all in the audio channel, in the verbal channel. We also have non-verbal. So people look at each other, they gaze, there's mutual gaze. Might also be facial expressions, people smiling as a response to what the other says or does. Gesturing, body movements, all this kind of thing. So in a normal conversation, you have quite a lot of behavior, both verbal and non-verbal. So this is can you actually see this? Or should we put out the light? Okay, so this is a very simple model of turn taking, and while it might seem really obvious, this is an actual video that's being used to teach autistic children how to have a conversation with other people. Let's see if it works.
Let's play. Your turn. Thanks. Your turn. Your turn. Thanks.
So what you see here is, it's getting really dark in here. Scary. So what you see here is a really simple model of how conversation works. So first one person speaks, then there is some kind of handover, and then the other person speaks. So you always know who's a speaker and who's not. Obviously, this model is way too simple, so we need to go beyond that. So in any conversation, you have speakers and listeners, and obviously the speaker is the one that holds the floor, so the one who's speaking at a certain point in time. And the listener also has quite an active role. So the listener is not only there being silent, the listener also shows interest, attention. He shows he's there, and he shows he's actually getting what the speaker is telling. So there's an active role both of the speaker and of the listener. And in dialogue, people take turns. So the speaker becomes the listener becomes the speaker, and this happens repeatedly. Oh, what did I do? Okay, so we are going to look not at all kinds of conversation. We're going to look at speaker-listener interactions, and these are different from any random conversation. So the big difference is that there is one person who's always the speaker, and another person is always the listener. There is no switching of the turns. And there are some typical situations where this happens. So for example, in giving instructions, if you ask, can you show me the way to the market? Someone would say, okay, take the second left and then go there, and roundabout, go left. All these kind of things would just, maybe we should just turn off this, it looks better. So route descriptions, but also maybe recipes, these kind of things. But also lectures or monologues. I will be speaking for several hours, and the only thing you will have to do is listen, and sometimes show me that you're still here and still following what I will say. But also within a dialogue, people just take turns. But then within these turns, sometimes there are small monologues. For example, if I would ask any one of you, how was your day? You would say several sentences before I might take the turn. So even on a smaller level, you have uninterrupted parts where someone is a speaker. We look at these kind of situations where one is the speaker and the other is the listener. Or just a picture. Because I didn't have enough slides, so I put in this one. So why do we look at speaker-listener interactions? Well, one good reason is because it's quite easy. Because looking at all conversations is so difficult, we start small. So we start with just speaker-listening interactions. And we don't have to model turn-taking, which is quite hard. So we look at static things. Another thing is that we don't have so much influence of interpersonal variables. So if you have two persons, they always have a relation. They might be friends, they might be family, one might be your boss. So, and the status relation affects how you talk with this person. And if we have one speaker and one listener, these effects are much smaller. And also, we don't need real understanding of what is said. And I put a question mark there because there's debate about this. So we have the feeling that we can model listening not by analyzing what is being said, but how it's being said. But I will come back to that in much more detail. But it's, at the same time, it's difficult because listening is an active process. The speaker is an active actor, but also the listener, because he continuously has to show attention, all these kind of things. And we'll show some examples how this can go wrong. Another thing is that we still need to analyze and also understand to some extent what the speaker is doing and how he is doing it, and if we are good listeners. Okay, this is a slightly longer video, so I will put this one down. It's a short clip from John Cleese and Rowan Atkinson. Oh yeah, that works. Yeah, let's see.
Good evening. Tonight we're taking a look at beekeeping. And here to tell us all about it, we have in the studio a man who's been keeping bees for over 40 years, Mr. Reginald Prawnman. Good evening, Mr. Prawnman. Good evening. Tell me, what first interested you in the bee world, Mr. Prawnman? Well, even as a child, I used to... I'm sorry, shouldn't I have said that? No, of course you should. Pay no attention, please. When I say shh, it's just a nervous mannerism I picked up. If I want you to keep quiet, I will say shush. What do you say?
Well, even as a child, I used to wander around. I'm sorry. In the fields near my home, watching the bees flying from flower to flower, and taking note of the flowers that they visited. Shush. Was that wrong?
I'm so sorry. Did I say shush? I meant shh. Do go on. It's most interesting.
And so I have grown to love the little creatures. I mean, nature really has produced a little masterpiece in the life.
I'm so sorry. I'm afraid that's a reflex action too. I squawk whenever someone mentions the word life. You see, even when I mention it myself. I should have told you. Please go on.
Oh, very well. Well, the bees, as you know, are divided into different categories. Shh. The queen bee and the worker bee, whose lifespan, whose living expectancy is only 1 year. The worker bees, on the other hand, have a much longer... Do you want me to stop?
Yes, you were just about to say life.
I wasn't.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Please, continue.
Well, as I was saying, the worker bees do have a much longer life. I'm sorry. It's got me rather rattled now. Well, this is how the bee community works. The queen bee stays in the hive. Is that because I said hive?
Punch.
Did you make that noise because I said the word hive? Oh, no. Why did you make it then?
I was just practicing.
Practicing?
Practicing for a word you're about to say very soon. Do go on.
While the worker bees fly from flower to flower, collecting the pollen. I see. Pollen. Pollen. I mean, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, every time I say pollen or hive or life. I mean, how did you ever get the job of being an interviewer? What's going on now? Is this because I said interviewer?
Okay, I think this gives a good example that listening behavior might be hard or disruptive at least. So the lessons learned is actually that attentive listening will keep conversations going for more time. So the more attentive you listen, the more people will tell, the more details they will reveal. And the opposite is also true. So inappropriate listening behavior, as we saw, just in timing, form, or amount will be disruptive and will also make the conversation harder. So in sum, listening is important, and that's why we're going to look at it. So one specific term that we're going to use throughout the rest of the talk is the back channel. And once again, we're looking at speaker-listening interaction, and the aim is to keep the speaker talking. So we will have to signal attention and interest throughout, but without the aim of taking the speaker turn. And that's important to see here. So back channels do that. They're also termed listener response, minimal feedback, acknowledgement talks, and they can have many forms. So they can be vocal, for example, and a typical back channel will be or yeah, or right, but also sentence completion. So someone will be saying, and then I went to the, and the other person would say left, and you would just complete the sentence without the aim of stealing the term from the speaker. And the same goes for repetitions, where you would just repeat the last part of what's being said. They can also be visual. So the typical example is nod. So if you're listening, you would say, do that, or give a smile, a frown, a blink, these kind of things. So they're really short messages, either vocal or visual, to the speaker that you are still there. They can be emotional or attitudinal, such as wow, really. That really a little bit shape the conversation. So if someone says wow, then you think yeah. So he's happy about what I just said. He's impressed. But still, you're not taking the turn. So that's important to realize here. Some only have a continuous function, just to say, I'm still there. I still understand what you're saying. These are called continuous, and we focus on those. Very specifically, we look at nods, and we look at very short vocalizations, and mainly the in the rest of the talk. So you will see a lot of nodding. You will hear a lot of So just to wrap up this part, we have conversations. Small part is that we have speaker-listening interactions, and if we look at listening behavior, we have back channels. So that's the very small part that we're going to talk about today. But a lot of things that we will see also generalize to speaker-listening interaction and might even be helpful in modeling conversation in the end. Okay, so there are some challenges that we have. So especially when we look at producing this behavior for virtual humans or robots or computer characters. So one of the things is when to produce a back channel. What is a good timing? It might depend on the listener's intent. So maybe you feel the urge to say maybe because you think, oh, I understood it and I said Also, they might be cued by the speaker. So the speaker maybe implicitly or explicitly is asking for some acknowledgement that you understood what he's saying. This can be really explicit by saying, right, or you get it. But it can also be, for example, by looking a little bit longer at someone. There might be different strategies. And there might be a lot of other factors involved. Maybe the topic, maybe the temperature of the day. All these kind of things probably also have a relation to when it's the right moment to produce a back channel. Culture is definitely one of those. What type of back channel is appropriate in what context? Can you always frown? Can you always nod? Can you always say So it depends on the context, and with context we mean the situation in which it is made, and usually we refer to the situation of the speaker, so within the discourse of the speaker, within his speech. Also, how do we do this automatically? So if we're going to have talks with computer characters, we need to do this automatically. We need algorithms that do this for us. So we need to detect cues. We need to know what is a good moment. Should we look at speech? Should we look at nonverbal behavior? What parts of the speech are important? Also, we need decision. What is the right moment to do it? Should there be a pattern in it? Should we make this decision at once? And also, we need to generate this kind of thing. So we're going to look at computer characters here, which we call virtual humans, or rather virtual listeners. And we'll see how that works here. Okay, this scheme you will see several times. This is basically the research that we do on a very high level. So left we start with a speaker, with a human speaker. We have some observation there. We observe audio and video with microphone and camera. And then we have a behavior synthesis model, which basically decides when to show certain back channel behavior. And then eventually we'll show this on the virtual listener. And we will have several versions of this scheme to evaluate different parts of this. So we have observation, we have decision, and we have the generation, so the 3 points I just mentioned. Okay, if we're going to look at backchannel cues, and especially when they are made, a lot of things are known from literature. So, for example, semantics are quite important. So, Watanabe has found that a lot of backchannels follow after sentence completion, which makes sense. You have just finished a statement. Yesterday, I went to Santiago. But the same can happen if it's the ending of a grammatic clause. Yesterday, we went to Santiago, and then we went for some beers. So the sentence is longer, but the grammatic clause is shorter. So also after certain word categories. So usually they are nouns. The probability a backchannel is followed is much higher because it might be the end of a statement. The problem with these semantic kind of features is that they're quite difficult to analyze in real time without too much computing power. So if we really want to understand what is being said, we need either a lot of computing power or we have to accept that we have a little bit of delay there, and the delay might not also be acceptable. So it's too time consuming and for real-time application. Are there solutions? Yes, there are, because we can also use low-level future. So we don't have the semantic information, so we don't know if it's the end of a sentence or the end of a grammatic clause. But we might have certain patterns in there, and certain patterns have been found. For example, if we look at pause, then it was found that a lot of backchannels are produced in pauses. And this is easy to explain because pauses often follow after sentences. So people will make a sentence, then pause for some time, and then it will continue with the next sentence. And the same goes for grammatic clauses. Also, gaze is a good cue. So it was found that almost 90% of the backchannels either followed after the completion of grammatical clause, but also when the listener or the speaker turned the head towards the listener. So there was clearly cueing there. And also over 80% was found during mutual gaze, which also is a good cue. Also prosody has been found to be useful. I think by now every one of you knows what prosody is. The tone of voice, not what's being said, but how it's being said. So rising pitch, falling pitch, region of low pitch, all these have found to precede backchannels, and we might take advantage of that in our algorithms. But the problem with all these studies is that they have been observed in different settings, and not all of them might be applicable to what we are doing. So, for example, some have been obtained in telephone settings, while we are looking at face-to-face. Some have been observed in Asian settings, where the azuchi is really different from the backchannel in the West. But also the type of conversation. It might be free speech, or an interview, or speaker-listener, and you have different types and different amounts of backchannels. Okay, there's 2 tools that we will use throughout this presentation. One is Elan. You might be familiar with that. Has anyone used it? 5, at least. Okay, you can use it to do manual annotations of video and audio, especially video is very useful. So you can see the videos, and at the same time you see here the annotation. So you can have different layers. You can, for example, annotate gaze. You can annotate what's being said. You can annotate gestures. And these might be co-occurring or not. And later on, you can use these kind of annotations to find correlations in your behavior. Another tool that we used, which is specifically designed for speech, is Praat from University of Amsterdam. It can be used to automatically find prosodic features from your speech. And we use that also. Okay, I come to the second part of this talk, and that is backchannel timings. We're going to look in more depth when the backchannels occur, and we're going to use these kind of knowledge for the rest of the talk. We're going to make automatic algorithms to do this. So the aim of this work is to find out when human subjects in human-human conversation use backchannels. And we're going to do corpus research on this. So we're going to just analyze a lot of videos, a lot of audio, and see if there's any patterns in those. In this research, we're going to differentiate between visual and vocal backchannels. So we're going to look at nods, and we're going to look at uh-huhs, and everything that's more or less the same. And also, we're going to look at the speech and the gaze of the speaker. So different from telephones, conversation, we take into account gaze, which is important to notice. And specifically, if we talk about backchannels, we look at the start of the backchannel. We don't care about how long it takes. We just say it's being produced right now. So we only look at the start of it. Okay, so this was research by a colleague of mine, Keith Room, last year. what we did was we took a Dutch spoken corpus. So I would love to show you a clip, but you won't understand anything of it. The subjects knew each other, which is important to consider, and also their task was to have free speech, so they could talk about anything, and mostly they were talking about shopping, holidays, and food, I think. So that's what Dutch people talk about, I guess. So there's 20 dialogues, 300 minutes, and there's over 3,000 backchannels, which gives you a rough idea how much data we used to get all these things. So this is how it was recorded. You see two people, actually they are colleagues, so they're not friends, that's why they're looking like that. But actually they have a nice conversation. I think the left one is telling her how she evaded police, something like that. Okay, the findings of our corpus analysis, that backchannels do indeed occur in pauses. And there's a difference between vocal and visual BCs. BC is backchannel, by the way. So vocal BCs occur in pauses about 73% of the time and 16% for visual. And actually this is how that looks. So I can explain. On the y-axis you see the percentage of speech, and on the x-axis you see the relative moments for the backchannel. So here at 0 the backchannel is being produced, and here this is a histogram. Basically this is the mean of all the backchannels in our corpus. So what you can clearly see is that the amount of speech, the relative amount of speech, is decreasing, and then the backchannel is being made. And the same goes for all three. So we have vocal, visual, and bimodal. And bimodal is a combination of vocal and visual. And you see there's this really clear pattern that backchannels are being made when speech is reducing. So either in a pause or slightly before a pause. Let's say about 1 second before. So these kind of insights are useful when you're going to produce this behavior. We also found some results for pitch. There is some evidence here that there is low high pitch regions before visual and vocals, but actually these are not much above chance level. You see that low pitch regions are a little bit, but the others are not. So you see that chance is quite important in these kind of things and have not always been taken into account. And same for rising and falling pitch. These are not that high, and chance is actually around the same levels. And then if we look at gaze, there are some clear patterns there. So if the BCer is gazing, that means that the listener is looking at the speaker. And the second column here is that the speaker is looking at the listener. Yeah, and this one is then they both look at each other. And you can see that all the numbers are quite high. There is also because of chance. I mean, in 85% of the time, the listener is looking at the speaker, and also in almost 70%, the speaker is looking at the listener. But you see there's still some patterns that there is more gaze between the two at the moment that there's a back channel. And we also have some nice graphs about it. You see that once back channel is being made, the amount of gaze decreases. So usually a nod is followed by a decrease of gaze where one of the two is gazing away. So, in very short, there are some differences in the context in which backchannels are being made. So they are characterized by low pitch of the speaker's speech, by slightly after mutual gaze, and also in or slightly, let's say a second before pauses. And next question is, can we use these findings to automatically determine when we should produce a backchannel? So instead of just looking at the facts, can we also use these to predict what is a good moment? And that's what we're going to do next. Of course, I have a little video.
Lewis! 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 Mom! 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 Mommy! 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 Mama! 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 Ma! 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 Mom! 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 Mommy! Mommy! Mama! 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 What? Hi. Lewis!
So you can see that it's quite hard to find the right cues to get a response. So that's actually what we're going to find out. So our aim is based on the observed cues of the previous research. Can we determine when we should produce a back channel? And here we only observe the speaker because we want to model the behavior of the listener, so we only look at the speaker. And we do this with corpus analysis. And basically, we can have two approaches to specify when we should produce a backchannel. And one is to define the rules manually. And the other is to use machine learning. And we'll discuss advantages and disadvantages of both. So if you have manual rules, these might be in the form of, if there is gaze, then you should produce a backchannel. Or if there was speech for the last second, you should produce a backchannel. So these rules are intuitive. We can just specify them and we can apply them immediately. But the disadvantage is that we might be missing less intuitive features. So there might be some features that we did not encode explicitly that are much more informative. And also the disadvantage is that we have to do the domain adaptation. So if you look at machine models, then the advantage and disadvantage are basically opposite. So the advantage is that we can employ possibly all features. We just put in a lot of stuff, learn a pattern, and come out with a model that might work. Disadvantage is that these models are not always intuitive. There might be features in there that are really domain specific, or maybe even noise. And the disadvantage is also that we probably need a lot of data to train these models. So for now, we just stick to the rule-based things because we have all this intuition gained from our previous research. So what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate rule-based backchannel predictions based on these simple cues. And we, again, going to use this Dutch corpus. And since we're only looking at speaker listening interactions, and the corpus is basically free speech, what we did was we found speaker turns. So we looked at segments of uninterrupted speech, and we just took these from the corpus. And we compared two rule-based algorithms. One is a well-known one by Watt and Tsukuhara, and the other is pitch and pause, because we felt the need to also evaluate something with pause in it. So this is the first, which was published in 2000. Okay, so it's kind of difficult to grasp at first reading. So what it basically says is, perform a backchannel when the speaker's speech contains a low pitch. So basically what it does is it looks at regions of low pitch, which last for at least 110 milliseconds, which were preceded by 700 milliseconds of speech, and no backchannel has been performed in the meantime. And then you wait for 800 milliseconds and you perform a backchannel. So these kind of rule-based systems can be used to automatically identify when to produce a backchannel. Pitch and pause is in the same form. After a pause of at least 400 milliseconds, which was preceded by at least 1 second of speech, where the last milliseconds contains a rising or a falling pitch, we should produce a backchannel. So there was speech, which ended rising or falling intonation, then there was a pause, and then we should perform a backchannel. So the two algorithms are quite different in that. So in short, perform a backchannel when the speaker's speech ends with a rising or falling pitch. Okay, what we need to do is evaluate the performance of the two algorithms. And what we do is we're going to use standard measures for information retrieval. And we're going to compare the predictions to the actually performed backchannels. So we have predictions, and we have what actually happened, and it gives us this 2x2 matrix. Who's not familiar with information retrieval measures such as these? Okay, I will just quickly go through it. So vertically, so the columns correspond to whether the actual behavior was performed or not performed, and rows is predictions, so these ones are predicted or not. So true positives, that means there was a backchannel produced in the corpus and there was also one predicted, so that's good. True negatives are there was nothing performed in the corpus and there was also nothing predicted, so that's also good. Then we have false negatives, which means that it was produced in the corpus but not predicted, so we missed that one. And we have false positives, which means that it's not produced in the corpus, but we thought that there should be one there, so we have one too much, and that's a false positive. Then we have two measures, actually. So first we have precision, which is a common measure, which basically the percentage of correct predictions within all predicted ones. So it's the true positives divided by true positives and false positives. And precision is basically a measure for how specific your algorithm is. And recall is basically the amount of the actually performed things that you find back. So percentage of correct within all actual ones. Precision and recall, they are typically negatively correlated. So if recall increases, precision drops, and the other way around. And also, it depends strongly on parameters or thresholds. So it's quite difficult to just say one setting with precision and recall and to compare. So that's why we have an F-score, which is basically the harmonic mean between precision and recall. So basically what you should remember is that the F-score is just one number, one measure to say something about both precision and recall. So you can actually capture the performance of an algorithm with one number. Since we deal with events in continuous time, what we need to know is specify when we find a match. And we think that a prediction and an actual thing are the same if they are within a margin of 200 milliseconds both way. So if the if the prediction is 200 milliseconds before the actually performed backchannels, we still say that it's the same thing. Okay, these are the results, and they don't look good at all. So you see that for both, the precision is around 10–12%, and the recall is 6% for Wada and Tsukahara, and pitch and pause doesn't get better than 20%. So these are quite low results if you compare what has been predicted by what has actually been done in the corpus. And you see the F-scores, they are also really low. So that would be a good conclusion. The scores are rather low. And of course, if you set the margin higher than 200 milliseconds, then more matches will be found, so you get more positives. So the results get better, but still, they are low. But then this question, how valuable are these results? What does it say if we have a precision of 12%? So there's a couple of questions that we might ask, such as, how bad is it that the back channel has been missed? Was it the missed opportunity? Is it bad if I don't nod, if someone else would nod? And the opposite. How bad is it if I would nod, if someone else did not nod? Is it a problem that you do it? So what we did here, in summary, is we compared two rule-based algorithms on a corpus, and we saw how well they worked. We used pitch and pause and speech information. The results turned out to be rather poor. We need to work on that. What we're going to do next is evaluate measures that are not looking at precision and recall, but we're going to look at how the behavior is being perceived by humans. So all these things that might be performed but not actually in the corpus might be okay, and we're going to look if that's really the case. So that's part 3. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions at some point, then
I was just wondering how did they arrive to those heuristics? After 100 milliseconds, you should have a back channel.
yeah, okay.
How did they arrive to that conclusion?
Okay, I know how we got to the pitch and part thing. Wada and Tsukahara, they just found this out. What we did was we evaluated over several sets of parameters. So we knew that we wanted to have the back channel in a pause, so we evaluated several lengths of this pause. So we first made the rules, then we put in some parameters, and then we evaluated over these.
How did you analyze the corpus?
Mm-hmm.
You did analysis of the corpus, right? I mean, was it completely manual? And you had a table where you said some percentage, they should be back channel here and here. So how did you get to that?
Okay, so we just had them talk. So there was just free speech without anything being told to them, and we annotated manually when they backchanneled.
So that was complete manual.
Yeah, that was complete manual. So the backchannels were annotated manually, and all the other parameters, so the speech, the pitch, that was done automatically. And also gaze we annotated manually. So we annotated when the start and the end of the gaze was.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're trying to predict back channels in a speaker-listener setting, as you said. So
Yeah.
you're using a corpus that is a conversational situation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No. not at all. So there was.
Use a different corpus where you had a speaker-listener setting.
Okay, so the results that you just found are not specifics for speaker-listener interactions. There was research that we did before, but it fitted quite well in the overall story. But it's true that the corpus really does not match the task that we now are focusing on. And we will actually work on that in the third part, where we have a corpus that is on speaker-listener interactions. Good question. No other questions? Otherwise, just raise your hand and we can get to it straight away. Okay, again, so the motivation is to make artificial listeners. So computers that can just have a conversation with you and be actually attentive listeners. So backchannels serve as continuers, and what we did before was we looked at rule-based strategies that just told us when to produce a certain backchannel. So there was a scheme that we saw before, and actually now we're going to do this. So we're going to have a human speaker, which is being observed. Then we're going to use behavior synthesis model, and again, we're going to use rule-based models. But now we're going to actually synthesize a virtual listener. So we're going to make videos, or animations rather, of this virtual listener, and we're going to show it to people and ask how they rate the behavior. So we're going to do user studies. So before we did corpus analysis, now we're going to actively involve the users. So backchannel strategies can be evaluated using corpus analysis, what we did before. We can also do manual annotation, and I will tell you a little bit more later on. Or we can do perception studies, and that's what we're going to focus on now. So the advantage of perception studies is that we can, the effect of missed opportunities, but also when backchannels are inserted. So all these things that you cannot measure or just always discredit when using objective measures, we can now actually measure. We can also look at the type of backchannel, because we can generate a nod or a vocalization and see how people react to that. And also we can look at the amount and the consistency of backchannel behavior, so we can evaluate it over a longer amount of time. So basically what we're doing is we're going to measure the perceived naturalness or the human likeliness of what we're doing. So this is research we did 2 years ago. Again, we're going to look at speech, pitch, and gaze at the listener. And we're going to use these features, and we're going to use these again in these rule-based systems. Based on these, we have 6 now instead of 2. And they're not domain specific, or at least that's not the point. So one thing to note is that all these features were calculated offline, but the features as such could be used online as well, because they can be calculated really quickly. So the differences with the previous experience, just a short outline for that. So we use now a corpus, that's basically your question, that is specific for speaker listening interactions instead of free speech. So that's one improvement. We're going to also look at gaze information. So not only speech, not only prosody, we're going to look at gaze as well. And we generate both visual and vocal backchannels. So we're going to look at the difference between those. And we're going to use different evaluation metrics, which is really important, and we can see how that eventually turns out. And we use more rule-based strategies. So we have 6. One is a random strategy. This is basically a control condition. So the random strategy does not take into account any features of the speaker. So it completely ignores it, as if you were listening without having a speaker there. And the thing we did was we looked at interval times, and we made a normal distribution based on the average amount between 2 backchannels and the standard deviation between 2 backchannels. And then we predicted, or actually we generated just backchannel behavior. It will be just a model that would every 5 or maybe 8 or 15 seconds say, that would be it. Then we had the copy condition, which is actually not an algorithm, but these are just, we took the corpus, which we annotated, and then every time a backchannel was being made, we also generated the backchannel in a stimulus. So there was no algorithm behind it, it was just exactly what happened, and this can also be seen as sort of a control condition. But it should be noted that the type of backchannel may differ. So maybe there was a backchannel that was not, and then we just said, okay, it could also be a visualization or vocalization. So Wada and Sukahara you saw before. So basically, perform a backchannel when the speaker's speech contains a low region of pitch. Then we have gaze. Since we found that gaze was quite important, especially at the moment that people start looking at each other, we had this rule that you should perform a back channel when there is gaze at the listener, so the speaker is looking at the listener, after 1 second of gaze, and then you should wait for 500 milliseconds and then produce the gaze. Produce the back channel, sorry. So perform a back channel when the speaker resumes the gaze at the listener. And then we have pitch and pause, which we saw before. And then we have pitch, pause, and gaze. So we combine the predictions of gaze with pitch and pause, so we should have more predictions. And the only thing that we did was if there would be predictions slightly after each other, so within 1 second, we would just mask out the second one. So this time we used a different corpus. We used the Semaine solid cell corpus, and it was actually recorded with the aim of analyzing speaker listening interactions. So there will be one speaker, and there will be one listener, and the listener actually had a more of an affective role, so there will be a listener with which will be really gloomy, or will be really happy, or will be aggressive. And we took the pragmatic character, which is just sensible and just a good listener, and every once in a while would ask a question, so the speaker could just rant on for half a minute. So the listener was instructed actually to keep the conversation going, so that makes the corpus ideal for this kind of research. And from the whole corpus we selected 16 fragments that we could use for a stimuli, and we selected those with different speakers and different listeners. Fragments are quite short, but they are uninterrupted speaker turns, so the speaker will be just telling for between 13 and 31 seconds in our case. So then we come to the stimuli. Since we're going to show these to the users, it's very important to know how they look like. So what we did was we made an animation of the listener. So we had a virtual listener, which was animated by having it produce nods or vocalizations, with the timings that were determined by the rule-based algorithms. And the speaker was just kept the same, so we would have a video of the speaker, and we would have an animation of the listener, and we would put them side by side, and that looks like this. So left the listener, right the speaker, so we just have the video of the speaker intact, and have a virtual version of the listener. And this, the thing below, we would show to the people. And I will show you an example just in a minute. So what we did for the back channel type, we just did this randomly because we had no idea how to do it before, and we had not enough stimuli to do this completely systematic. We do that later. So we had 2/3 of all our data was nods, and only 4% was vocalizations only. And in 30% of the cases, it was a bimodal, so a nod plus an aha. And I used the same for in our stimuli. We also animated blinks because we thought it looked really static if you would just be looking at a character that would do nothing except for maybe give one nod after 20 seconds. So we did blinks just to keep a little bit of realism in that. Okay, so this is one example of a stimulus.
That's all very well, but the problem is it's been going for a month, nearly 5 weeks now, and everyone keeps promising me there's going to be an improvement. But in fact, when I spend an extra hour or so in the day working, I just get so tired. It's such a miserable. That's
Okay.
all.
Actually, the guy on the right. Actually, the guy on the right is complaining for half an hour, which is hilarious. So you saw different things in this video. So you saw blinks, you saw nods, and you heard Actually, there was the copy condition. So actually, all these back channels have been performed in actual corpus, and some of them might be at really strange places or have a really strange form. So that was what had to be evaluated. So the procedure was, we had 20 volunteers, or basically these were students and they did not really volunteer, but still they did it. And each was shown 48 clips. So we had 8 fragments and in all 6 conditions. So they had to watch it for about half an hour. And after watching each fragment, so between 13 and 31 seconds, they were asked, how likely do you think the listener's back channel behavior has been performed by a human listener? So basically, they were asked, do you think is this realistic behavior? Do you think it's human-like? And they were to rate it on a scale from 0 to 100. So session lasted for about 30 minutes. They could take breaks. They could do anything. And these are the results. So overall, if you look at it, the scores are rather low. You see differences. So complete left is the copy condition, which is what has actually been performed in the corpus. And you see that does not even reach 60%. So people are quite critical about what they see, and they often judge it as not being human-like at all. You see that gaze not even reaches 30%, and you see that there are some differences, and some are more or less the same. Of note is also the random condition, which also scores quite okay with some of the others. So apparently, the quantity might be an issue, and we're going to look at it later. So just some statistics. We performed ANOVA, repeated measures, and we found a strategy. So the different rule-based systems, they were significantly different. And most pairs were the same. But despite these differences, which is all nice and which gives an idea which algorithm works better than the other, but we want to know why are there differences. So can we explain these differences? Now, we can a little bit. So if we look at the quantity, then it appears that the more backchannels per minute are being generated, the better behavior is being perceived. So the more, the better. Okay, it sounds a little bit paradoxical, but we're going to look into that later as well. But gaze and pitch and pause have only half the number of backchannels, so that should be sorted out as well. So timing is also important. And also we found some effects here. So we analyzed how many backchannels overlap with those performed in the original listener's video. So we're going to turn back to the precision and recall scores. And again, we're going to use this margin of 200 milliseconds. And it gives us this graph. So you see here the number of backchannels. You see the most have around 50 backchannels over all stimuli. Apart from gaze and pitch and pause, have only 25. So we're going to look at precision. We see the precision is generally low, except for pitch and pause, and a little bit for pitch, pause, and gaze. And also recall measures are quite low. These are the highest, but still not that good. But you see that especially pitch and pause now is performing really well. But you see also that gaze is performing really poorly. And also random condition is doing quite well. So apparently you can better generate random sequences than use the algorithm was made 10 years ago. So we see that the timing of backchannels overlaps a little bit, correlates with higher scores, but this is not a significant finding. So basically, the better the overlap, so the higher the F-score, doesn't mean that it gets also better perceptual ratings. So there's a difference between the objective measures that should say how well does it approximate what has been done, and the ratings that humans gave, which says how well is this, of how natural is this behavior. So one of the things we dig slightly deeper into is the gaze strategy. Why is it so poorly scoring? So the last rule, if we just leave this out, so we don't wait for 500 milliseconds, then somehow our precision and recall are 3 times higher. So that gives a little bit of an idea that if you just change these parameters, and that was basically your question, if you change these parameters, you might get really different results. So that is quite sensitive to all these parameters. A third variable we're going to look into is type. It was found in fragments with many vocalizations, so with the aha were rated higher than fragments with more nods. And also people said that if the vocalization was put at exactly the right time, then they really thought they were just listening to a human listener. And also some participants remarked that blinks could also be back channels because it's a sign of attention. So a very short summary. We did a perception experiment, so different from corpus analysis. We did a perception experiment. We looked at speech and gaze. The results were quite poor. People did not really think this was human-like. And gaze might be a useful feature, but we know for sure. And also we saw some effects for quantity, timing, and type. So, is it already time for break? Okay, I will just finish this one, and then we will have break. So there are some flaws that we will address, but first, perception scores and F scores, so the objective measures, they were not significantly correlated, which means that having a good precision and recall does not mean automatically that behavior is also perceived well, and the opposite. So this is the consequence, behavior that is different from the one that is actually performed in the corpus can still be okay. And there's more insight needed in the factors, quantity, type, timing, that influence these results. So this listening behavior, can we make it better? I think I'm going to put this one down now.
I read in the Wall Street Journal that the owner of this chain parlayed a plastic model restaurant into $1 billion international culinary empire.
I wonder if this chair is edible.
Yes, it is, but if you eat it, you'll have to stand. Just be patient. Our food's on the way. And stop interrupting me.
Interrupting you? Is this a conversation or a monologue?
When will I ever find a man who's a good listener? It's not a hard thing to do. Any horse knows how to keep his mouth shut and keep nodding his head.
So that's what girls love about horses.
I read in the Wall Street Journal.
Oh. So what she says in the end, it was difficult to understand because it's computer speech. She says, when do I ever find a good listener? It's not a hard thing to do. Any horse knows how to keep his mouth shut and keep nodding his head. Questions that we have, obviously, is how often should you nod? What makes you a good horse? Also, can you only nod or can you sometimes say, uh-huh? So type is important. And also, can we just nod at any random time, or should we just wait for someone to look at us and then nod? So I think it's quite hard to please this woman in this restaurant. So and we're going to look at all her questions that she has. So we're going to systematically investigate these three things. So we just looked at them briefly in the previous study, and now we're going to systematically find out how well they work. So we use the same corpus, the speaker listening interactions. Actually, we're going to use the same fragments. And we selected the 12 with the most back channels. So we left out 4, which only had 1 back channel. And it was to keep the design okay. So again, we replaced the video of the listener with an artificial listener. But it's important to notice that this time, we're going to systematically investigate these 3, quantity, type, and timing. And we're going to base this on the actually performed back channels in the corpus. So instead of using algorithms, instead of using the rules, we're going to see what has actually been performed, and we're going to replace the quantity, type, and timing, kind of evaluate just systematically. So the type can be, again, either uh-huh, or a not, or multimodal. So we have 3 hypotheses, and each one has several conditions that we can use to test it. So we have the quantity hypothesis. So fragments with higher number of back channels per minute are perceived as more human-like. So we have 3 conditions. Either we take all the back channels that were in the original corpus, or we're going to use only the odd ones. So if we have 5 back channels, we're going to use only the first, the third, and the fifth, and the even ones. So we're going to use the second and the fourth. So the second and the third condition together are the back channels of the first condition. So second hypothesis at the type. If we change the type, so if we're going to make a not a vocalization or a vocalization a not, then it's going to be perceived as less human-like. So we expect there's differences in the context and the type. So we have the original types in one condition, and we have the switch type in another condition. And finally, we have the timing hypothesis. So we expect that if we use the times that were actually performed by the real listener, they will be perceived better than if we use the timings that were just completely random according to some model. So we have, again, 2 conditions, original and random. So in these 3, 2, and 2 conditions, we cross them, which eventually gives us 12 conditions, and given the 12 fragments, gives us 144 different stimuli. We use 6 different sets of 24 stimuli, and then again we recruited some subjects who just evaluated all these stimuli. So each stimulus, each video, so each back channel was looked at by 4 different subjects. So again, we asked them to rate how human-like they perceived it. So we asked the same question, and they had to rate between 0 and 100. But in addition, we wanted to know for each back channel within the fragment how well it was perceived. So we wanted to have ratings for individual back channels. And instead of having the video stop every time a back channel was being made, what we did was we asked them to press a button while the video was playing, so it would have immediately a rating. And they only were instructed to press a button if they thought the back channel was inappropriate. So they will be watching the video and just press a button if they thought, no, this is not right. And eventually what we did was we matched the button presses to the back channels that were just slightly proceeding, and then we had a measure of how inappropriate each back channel was. And we're going to look at both the fragment ratings, so the measurements between 0 and 100, and the yucks, which is the name that we invented for the fact that someone just presses a button. They're saying, yuck, this is not right. You can still use this name. We did not patent it or anything. So, differences with the previous experiment. We varied quantity, type, and timing systematically, which was different. We based them not on the algorithms, but on the copy conditions, so what actually has been performed. And we're going to look at both fragment ratings, but also individual back channels. And again, this is an example. It looks more or less the same as you saw before.
And in research, and I want to send more broad terms of the sort of research I do, so stroke rehab and more neuroscience and neurophysiology side of things. So I really enjoy it. I think it's probably unlikely I'll be able to stay in Queens to do that, so I'll probably have to go elsewhere. So it'll be sort of weighing up options of how far I'd like to go and what people have. I want to stay in research, and
Okay, some of the things that you will see is that the listener is sometimes even more engaged than the speaker. So most of the speakers are really boring. And also most of them are from Scotland, I think, which also might bias some of the results, but still. The results for the fragment rating. So these are the ratings that have been formed at the level of a whole speaker turn, over 30 seconds, for example. So again, we used ANOVA. We used all the variables as independent ones. For the quantity hypothesis, we thought that the more back channels, the better. And if we look at it, this is not true. So the original one has the same amount of back channels as these two added, but you see that the differences are minimal. So the hypothesis is rejected. So the more is not the better. But we found an interaction effect between quantity and timing. So the more back channels you produce, if you do it with bad timing, random timing, then it's perceived as worse. If you're gonna do more back channels with actual timing, then it's perceived better. So there's an interaction effect in that, and you don't see that in the graphs here, obviously. So we have the type hypothesis. We thought that the original types will be perceived as more human-like than if we would change a knot by vocalization and the other way around. And that's actually true. So this was actually a significant effect. You see the difference is not that big, it's not even 10 points, but still it's significant. And then also we find a timing hypothesis. So if we would have random timings and we would have original timings, then the original ones we expected would have better scores. And that is also true. And there is also a significant effect, which is not that strange. Then we're going to look at the individual back channels. And this is the last thing we do before the break. So we can look at the number of yucks for each back channel. So each back channel, each back channel has been seen by 4 different subjects, and each of them could press the button or could not press the button. So we have a number of yucks between 0 and 4. And we use it as a measure of inappropriateness of the back channel. And the amounts of yucks follow this pattern. So this is a frequency histogram. You see that most of the back channels did not receive any yuck. Only a few received 4. And this is a clearly decreasing pattern there. In addition, we used parasocial consensus sampling, and I should explain it just slightly. We also had people just look at the video of the speaker and press a button whenever they would nod. So instead of having only one speaker or only one listener and taking only these nods, we had 9 people do it, and that gives us a score for each moment how appropriate it is to do that. So we have more variability because we have different subjects do this. And we had 9 raters, so scores are between 0 and 9, and we see the same pattern. So most of the back channels were not indicated as a good moment by any of the raters, and only very few by 9. You see that is probably 1 or 2. So the yucks, so on the left, the red ones, are measures of inappropriateness. The PCS is a measure of appropriateness, and these are negatively correlated, which makes sense. So, summary of the findings. So quantity, higher rate of back channels results not in a better score altogether, but there seems to be an upper and lower bound. And we expect that between 6 and 12 is a good number. Type, changing the type actually is not a good idea. So nods should be nods and vocalizations should be vocalizations. It's better to perform a nod if you're not sure than to have a vocalization, because a vocalization in speech is often found disruptive. And finally, the timing, random timings do not work so well. In fact, the chances are 2.5 times higher that they will receive a nod. So a short summary, what we did was we systematically investigated timing, quantity, and type on the perception of both fragment ratings and also individual nods. We saw an effect for quantity, also for type, and also for timing. And now it's time for a break. Okay, there is a practical session, but the practical session is not that practical because it involves videos. If you're really bored and don't want coffee, then you can go to this URL, and there are some videos there, and you can just press buttons. That's it. So it might be really slow, and might also not work with all browsers. But if you want to do this, then you can eventually see how well your behavior correlates with behavior of others. So, and I think we can have a break now.